Rebrands in football are getting crazier and crazier. Legendary Romanian West Ham slayers FC Astra Giurgiu changed their name 13 times in total, including 6 times between 1996 and their collapse in 2022 alone. Feyenoord unveiled a radical rebrand in 2024, adopting a completely different crest which must have cost millions to redesign, and Manchester City have adopted a retro concept this season, rebranding themselves as a struggling mid-table team, harking back to their own pre-Emirati era. It will divide opinion, I've no doubt, but personally, I think that kind of commitment to tradition is to be admired. That was a joke, of course. I sometimes start my videos with one of those, just to disarm the audience and put everyone at ease, but now that you are hopefully supremely relaxed and comfortable within the warm bosom of HITC Sevens, it is time to get serious. Rebrands in football aren't actually getting crazier and crazier, broadly speaking. For the most part, as I covered on this channel almost a year ago, they are becoming increasingly dull and indistinguishable. Clubs and national teams as varied as Bristol City, Thailand, Yeovil Town, Hellas Verona, Costa Rica and Nantes have all discarded their traditional, more detailed and intricate crests in recent years in favour of much more minimalist, basic and uniform designs. There are now hundreds of clubs with incredibly similar looking circular badges, and I'm not just talking about those owned by the City Football Group, although they are a particularly egregious example. That is partly because clubs and countries think that simpler designs are more immediately recognisable for marketing purposes and increasingly view themselves as brands as much as football clubs. It is partly because it makes them easier to print on shirts and other forms of merchandise, and an often overlooked consideration is the fact that in the digital and online world, stripped-back logos with fewer colours are more versatile and adaptable. Being boring, in of itself then, isn't enough to earn a bad rebrand a spot in this 7, which is very good news for the likes of West Ham, Girona, and, maybe the worst example of all, Columbus Crew. There are simply too many of them. Even Everton's hated rebrand of 2013, which sparked so much outrage from supporters that it was reversed after a single season, Joey Saputo's controversial changing of Montreal Impact's name, colours and crest in 2021, becoming Club de Foot Montreal instead, leading to angry protests and the Impact reverting back to their original colours in 2022, and Inter Milan taking perhaps the most iconic badge in all of world football, and making it worse in every sense for absolutely no good reason whatsoever in 2021 or miss out, such is the calibre of the competition. Without further ado then, who of course rebranded himself from the next Pele to failed wonder kid, followed by journeyman flop during his playing days, unfortunately, here are 7 of the worst rebrands in the history of football. 7th, Leeds United. You know that a rebrand is really bad when it never even sees the light of day. Leeds United might have tried to delete all evidence of this monstrosity, like a couple after a breakup removing any trace of one another from their Instagram accounts, but the internet never forgets. On a random Wednesday evening in January 2018, Leeds decided to break the internet with this post, which read, "Our new crest. 6 months of research, 10,000 people consulted, ready for the next 100 years. Watch video." End quotes. If you try to click on the link these days, it will take you to this page. Unfortunately, say Leeds United, the page you are trying to view isn't available. That should be fortunately, as far as most Leeds United fans are concerned, as within hours of that post being shared on social media, a verifiable shitstorm had started as tens of thousands of Leeds fans rushed to sign a petition calling for the rebrand to be scrapped. Meanwhile, every other fanbase in England broke out in fits of laughter. Unlike with Everton's failed rebrand in 2013, which lasted just a single season, new Leeds United owner Andrea Radrizzani sensed the strength of feeling among supporters and performed an immediate screeching U-turn. 6 months of research wasted then, 10,000 people consulted, though presumably none of them Leeds United fans, and not even ready for the next 3 hours of scrutiny, let alone 100 years. Leeds' failed rebrand was a classic case of a foreign owner failing to read the room, as Redesign felt Leeds' old badge was outdated. He wanted the club's full name on it, rather than merely their initials to be present on the crest, and he thought more refined and modern iconography would make it easier to market the club overseas. What he hadn't considered, seemingly, is that the rebrand looked like it was taken from a template on paint at a cost of, at most, maybe £3.50, and it made Leeds look like a fictional team on an old arcade game, or just one that they didn't have the rights to on PES. Ironically, comparisons were also made to the actual cover of Pro Evolution Soccer 2. Great game, by the way. The memes were swift and merciless, the mocking still in shoes almost 7 years on, and Leeds United fans are still having nightmares about it, before waking up and realising that, oh god, no, it actually happened. If they'd stuck with it, it would be even higher. Even after announcing that they would rethink the rebrand within 24 hours of unveiling it, before scrapping it within less than a week, it's still bad enough to take 7th. 6th, Juventus. Unlike Leeds' new badge, which everyone agreed was worse than an outbreak of a deadly and highly contagious pathogen, this one divides opinion. A rebrand that I covered extensively in my video about why football logos are becoming so boring. Basically, most Juventus fans, and indeed most football fans, hated the new Juventus logo and broader rebrand that was unveiled in 2017 and then updated in 2020, removing the club's name, so it just became a big J, but most marketing executives, graphic designers and brand consultants absolutely love it. At the same time that Juventus fans were protesting their badge change, albeit not quite as vociferously as Everton or Leeds supporters, for example, the club themselves are winning branding and marketing awards for their innovative new design. It is maybe the best example of the disconnect that I described earlier on between supporters who tend to value tradition, familiarity, and the emotional resonance of imagery in football, and clubs, and especially super clubs, who value versatility, simplicity, and being instantly recognisable. The Juventus rebrand took inspiration not from the world of football, but from companies like McDonald's, Google, and, from the world of sport, maybe the most notable example, the New York Yankees. Juventus' merchandising revenue since the rebrand has vindicated their decision, they feel, although one suspects that signing Cristiano Ronaldo helped on that front, so from that perspective, this is perhaps the most successful rebrand in this 7. I am not a marketing executive though, and nor are most of you, which means that we can be honest about this being perhaps the biggest downgrade in football since Liverpool sold a world-class forward in Luis Suarez, and signed Ricky Lambert, a man who literally thinks that you can talk water into tasting nicer, in the same transfer window. The singular J, stylised or otherwise, had never been a part of Juventus' branding before 2017. The old logo was iconic and traced its roots all the way back to the club's founding in 1905, and, to make matters worse still, the Juventus rebrand coincided with a downturn in results. As some Juventus fans see it, the old logo symbolised the spirit, success, and history of Juventus, whereas the new badge is synonymous with the Juventus Corporation, the signing of Cristiano Ronaldo, and a soulless corporation fixated with selling expensive athleisure and even furniture, rather than winning games of football. Was all of that really worth it for a dubiously cited 10% increase in merchandise sales? Not for me. It looks like an NFL logo, and it features in 6th. 5th, Bordeaux. Few clubs have been as horrendously mismanaged in recent years as Girondins de Bordeaux, culminating in the club's double relegation, administration, and the loss of their professional status in 2024. One could argue that Bordeaux's demise, following their last Ligue 1 title in 2009, began under long-time owners Groupe M6, a French media conglomerate, but it was after they sold the club to American investors in 2018 that things began to rapidly unwind. A messy takeover, in which King Street Capital were the majority shareholders, followed by Fortress Investment Group, but minority owners General American Capital Partners were the face of the takeover. There is a perception in France, as in much of Europe, that Americans just don't get European football. That is not always the case, of course. although American asset management firms in particular are unlikely to be first and foremost passionate football fans, and together, King Street and GACP lived up to all of the worst stereotypes about American owners. In 2020, 6 months after King Street bought out GACP's minority stake in the club, they decided to carry out a major rebrand of a club which can trace its roots back to the 1880s. While the team fell apart on the pitch, King Street implemented their rebrand and new badge with zero fan consultation. Perhaps if they had spoken to some fans, they might have been given some lessons in French. Bordeaux's updated badge wasn't radically different from their old one in design, except for the fact that it dropped the word de, which means of in French, and inverted the words Girondin and Bordeaux. It meant that the club's new badge read Bordeaux Girondin, which both isn't the club's name, of course, and also doesn't make grammatical sense in French. Unsurprisingly, Bordeaux fans weren't best pleased with their nonsensical updated badge, not least because it coincided with the club falling apart on the pitch, mounting debts off it, and a series of ownership disputes. The rebrand lasted just a single season, like Everton's, and while it looked less like a cartoon Hobbit house than Everton's, at least the rebranded Everton badge did get their name right. Unfortunately, while the crap badge was relatively quickly rectified, the crap team and crap ownership persisted in the long term, which is why Bordeaux now find themselves in the 4th tier of French football. 4th, Chicago Fire FC. MLS teams rebrand as often as most teams unveil a new home or away kit. What's more, as I have covered in another previous video, I don't think that most of these rebrands are very good, or that Major League Soccer's obsession with rebranding is very healthy. Increasingly, MLS teams have adopted not just more uniform and minimalist logos and branding, like everyone else, but rebrands that strip away all of the novelty, individuality, and quirks of Major League Soccer, typically in an effort to be more like European clubs. When Major League Soccer launched in 1996, the league featured absolutely mental teams like Tampa Bay Mutiny, who signed Carlos Valderrama and won the first ever Supporters' Shield, and whose logo featured a supposedly mutant bat. No, seriously. Dallas Burn, whose logo featured a fire-breathing black Mustang behind a stylized red Burn woodmark, and Kansas City Wiz, later Kansas City Wizards, whose logo predominantly featured the word Wiz in a retro 60s style font below a flying football. It might be less than 30 years old, but from an MLS perspective, this is football heritage. Now Tampa Bay Mutiny no longer exist, they were dissolved in 2002, Dallas Burn have been renamed FC Dallas, and their logo no longer features any fire-breathing Mustangs, having rebranded following their move to Pizza Hut Park in 2005, and Kansas City Wiz are now sporting Kansas City, stripped of all of their magic and wizardry, and their new logo is about as inspiring as Wes Streeting. I mentioned the Columbus Crew abomination in the introduction, and Houston Dynamo's 2020 rebrand was similarly depressing, but the worst of the lot may be Chicago Fire. Chicago Fire joined Major League Soccer in 1998, the division's 3rd season. They took their name from the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and they were founded on the 126th anniversary of the event. Nicknamed The Fire as a result, their club's badge, which had unusual longevity by MLS standards, lasting from their 1997 founding until 2019, was derived from the Cross of St. Florian, a common symbol among fire departments in the United States, with a stylized C which is synonymous with Chicago, and the city's other sports teams, like the Bears and the Cubs. All of that was changed in 2019. The name was only tweaked to Chicago Fire Football Club, but the new logo was an absolute shambles. Gone was the Cross of St. Florian and the distinctive C, replaced by 3 mirrored nonsensical peaks, supposed to represent Chicago Fire's rise from the ashes in a nondescript shield. Not only did it look terrible, some people felt that the 3 peaks resembled a crown, invoking notions of the Latin Kings, an infamous street and crime gang which was founded in Chicago in the 1950s, and is still very much active today. Having initially doubled down in the face of backlash from supporters, the club, to their credit, eventually did the right thing, consulting 20,000 supporters over the next 6 months before unveiling a new logo, which was far more respecting of the club's heritage, while also not looking absolute dogshit. Which, is always a plus. The Chicago Fire rebrand was particularly poorly received because it came off the back of a decade of mediocrity and failure on the pitch, and, unfortunately, despite the rebrand in 2021, things haven't really improved on that front since then. Chicago Fire finished 15th out of 15 teams in the Eastern Conference in 2024, and 28th out of 29 teams in the MLS's overall standings. Third, Cardiff City. It's not just American asset management firms that don't get it, so to speak, when it comes to European football. Sometimes it is also Malaysian billionaires who like to wear dress shirts underneath a football shirt, and it is great to see that kind of diversity when it comes to dreadful owners running roughshod over the norms and traditions of centuries-old sporting institutions. Unlike some of the inclusions in this 7, Cardiff City's 2012 rebrand, implemented upon the personal whims of owner Vincent Tan, wasn't just a change of logo, and nor was it immediately overturned following an angry reaction from supporters, both of which are why it is the first inclusion to make our podium. Vincent Tan became Cardiff City's owner in 2010 after a consortium of Malaysian investors, led by him, acquired 35% of the club's shares. The deal was finalised during the same month that Cardiff lost 3-2 against Blackpool in the Championship playoff final, missing out on a first promotion to the top flight during the Premier League era. In Tan's debut campaign, Cardiff finished 4th again, losing to Reading in the playoff semi-final, and the following year, they made it 3 successive unsuccessful Championship playoff campaigns, losing in the semi-finals again, this time against West Ham. It was during the same summer of 2012 that news of a major rebrand was leaked and then confirmed by Tan. Cardiff City, Tan announced, who had played in blue since 1908, had a bluebird on their badge since the 1950s and were literally nicknamed the Bluebirds, would be changing their colours from blue to red. The primary colours of the club's badge was also changed from blue to red, and the bluebird was relegated to obscurity, tagged on at the bottom of Cardiff's new crest, but replaced by a big red Welsh dragon. There was even talk of changing the club's name to Cardiff Dragons if they won promotion. Like all good rebrands, this one came with some blackmail. If Cardiff City fans accepted Tan's wholesale rebrand, he said, he would forgive the £63 million that he had already lent the club and invest a further £100 million, but if they opposed it, he would remove all funding and leave. It is what is known within the world of business as a billionaire tantrum and throwing your toys out of the pram, and it is surprisingly common in the world of football, where fans tend to be a little bit more emotionally invested than customers of, let's say, Tan's Berjaya Corporation. In response to the backlash to his decision, Tan stated, and I quote, "I didn't like the bluebird," adding, quote, "Red is my lucky colour," end quote. That's great and all, Vincent, but maybe you should have bought a club that plays in red then, and not one that is nicknamed the fucking Bluebirds. It's just an idea. Cardiff finally won promotion to the Premier League for the first time while playing in red for the first time, which Tan seemed to think vindicated his daft idea. In actual fact, it just took an element of satisfaction and glean away from what ought to have been a jubilant campaign for Cardiff City supporters, and it foreshadowed events which were to come. At the start of the following season, Tan suspended Cardiff's head of recruitment, Ian Moody, replacing him with a 23-year-old Kazakh who was previously on work experience with the club and happened to be a friend of Tan's son, and Moody was swiftly followed by manager Malky Mackay as well. It later transpired that Tan had a pretty good reason for getting rid of Moody and Mackay, namely racism, but he never had a good reason for ripping up Cardiff's century-old identity, and when results turned, the atmosphere at the club turned toxic too. In 2015, 3 years into the failed rebrand, as Cardiff sat mid-table in the Championship, rather than having become an enormous global brand as Tan had promised, he finally relented, changing the club's colours back to blue, bringing back the bluebird, which he hated, and reducing the Welsh dragon to a minor role instead. Second, Hull City. I am frequently mocked in the comments section for shoehorning Hull City references into videos for no good reason, but on this occasion, the club that is committed to destroying my soul week by week is actually a very legitimate inclusion, regardless of my own personal investment. Not dissimilar to Cardiff City's rebrand in terms of timing, ownership situation, and blackmail. If anything, the Hull City rebrand was slightly worse. While clubs typically alter their badges and branding every couple of decades, and maybe even their colours once in a blue moon, very few English football clubs have changed their names in the last century. It tends to be one of very few constants, but not when Assem Allam is involved. The eccentric Egyptian-born businessman who built a small fortune through his company selling diesel generators while living on the outskirts of Hull, stepped in to save the club in 2010. Following relegation from the Premier League, the Tigers were on the verge of administration, if not worse, and for a while, saviours seemed to be in short supply. Allam described his £1 takeover and commitment to clear the club's £35 million debt as a gift to the city of Hull. Albeit, that gift did come in the form of a loan, which carried 5% interest. That might seem like an odd way of structuring a supposed gift, but at the time, it was as good as Hull City were going to get, and the new ownership, unsurprisingly, enjoyed tremendous goodwill from supporters. In 3 seasons, they stabilised the club's finances, climbed up the league table, and won promotion to the Premier League in manager Steve Bruce's first season in charge. The following season, the Tigers not only survived in the Premier League but reached an FA Cup final, only losing narrowly in extra time against Arsenal and qualifying for Europe for the very first time. Assem Allam ought to have been a hero, and a statue of him erected outside of the KC Stadium. And he would have been, and one also probably now would have been, were it not for a dispute with the local council, which led to him setting his reputation ablaze with a bizarre and vindictive rebrand. Allam wanted to buy the KC Stadium, now the MKM Stadium, and surrounding land, which is owned and was built by Hull City Council in 2002, in order to develop on it. He sold a grand vision of a sporting village, like the Etihad campus in Manchester, promising a £114 million investment at expanding the ground's capacity from 25 to 35,000, but he basically wanted the council to hand over the stadium to him for free, which is shared with rugby league club Hull FC. When his offer was rejected, Allam staged photo ops in Melton, in East Yorkshire, where his Allam Marine business is based, declaring that he would build his sporting village at a 40,000-seater stadium there instead. It was all nonsense, and when his bluff was called, Allam lashed out further, claiming that the name Hull City, which is the only name that the club has ever had since its inception in 1904, was, quote, lousy, describing the word city as, again, quote, common and irrelevant. At one point, he even started suggesting name changes for other clubs, declaring that if he were the owner of Manchester City, he would change the club's name to Manchester Hunter. He wasn't the owner of Manchester City though, unfortunately. He was the owner of Hull City, and he unilaterally declared that Hull City would henceforth be known as Hull City Tigers locally, and simply Hull Tigers to an international audience. Hull City fans, not really wanting to change their 109-year-old name or sound like an NHL or NFL team for some reason, weren't overly impressed, launching a campaign against the proposed name change. All of a sudden, Allam had a new enemy. Now it wasn't just the council, it was Hull City fans as well. In response to supporters chanting "City till I die," a chant which was common at the club both before and after the proposed name change, Allam told supporters that they could, quote, die when they wanted. As with Vincent Tan, Assem Allam's rebrand was accompanied by a lovely bit of blackmail, as he threatened to pull funding if supporters wouldn't play ball, and that is exactly what he did. The Hull City Tigers and Hull Tigers name change applications were rejected by the FA, but that didn't stop Allam from implementing them on club documentation regardless, in addition to changing the club's badge, erasing the words Hull City. What made the whole thing so stupid is that, On the pitch, while all of this was going on, this was about as good as Hull City have ever had it, and they had the opportunity to establish themselves in the Premier League and create a lasting legacy. Instead, Alam doubled down, the club was relegated, attendances dwindled, protests were ongoing, funding was removed, and the Tigers eventually dropped down into League One. What could have been, eh? Assem Alam died in 2022, aged 83, 11 months after selling Hull City to Turkish oligarch Acun Ilıcalı. First, RB Leipzig. Some rebrands are uninspiring, some are embarrassing, and some are even shameful. Even the very worst of them, though, like Vincent Tan changing Cardiff City's crest, colours and identity, because he likes the colour red and doesn't like bluebirds, or Assem Alam trying to change Hull City's name, badge and identity because he fell out with the local council, tend to only impact the specific clubs involved. The rebranding of 5th tier SSV Markranstädt in Germany, by contrast, marked a watershed moment in football for all clubs, not just an amateur team from Saxony. Markranstädt wasn't Red Bull's first investment in football. They had already bought 3-time Austrian champions SV Austria Salzburg, changing their name to Red Bull Salzburg, along with Major League Soccer franchise the Metro Stars, renaming them New York Red Bulls, and founding a brand new club called Red Bull Brazil in, you guessed it, Brazil. Austria is a minor league in a European context though, meanwhile Major League Soccer is used to wholesale rebrands, and Red Bull Brazil were a new club. Germany are not only European powerhouses, they are also the last bastion among the continent's, if not the world's efforts, to safeguard football from the whims of private investors, thanks to strong fan participation, the 50+1 rule, and an active football association. In the case of Red Bull's takeover of SSV Markranstädt in 2009, the DFB prevented Red Bull from inserting their branding into the club's name and logo directly, as per their own rules, as Red Bull had been able to in Austria, but Red Bull just renamed the club Rasenballsport Leipzig, or RB Leipzig for short, and inserted a similar but different enough-looking pair of bulls to their own logo into the club's badge. Bankrolled by since-deceased billionaire Dietrich Mateschitz and his energy drink empire, RB Leipzig rapidly ascended the German Football League pyramid, replacing Hoffenheim as the most hated club in Germany upon their arrival in the Bundesliga. The fact that Red Bull were allowed to acquire SSV Markranstädt's playing rights, plaster it in thinly veiled advertising for their multinational conglomerate, and become a major force in German football was perhaps the starkest indication yet as to the state of the modern game. If this can happen in Germany, it can quite literally happen anywhere, and sure enough, it either already has or soon will. Say what you want about Americans running Bordeaux into the ground and rebranding them as something which doesn't make sense in French. It is undeniably less than ideal, but it is still better than if they had renamed the club King Street Capital Bordeaux, so RB Leipzig take top spot as not just the worst rebranding exercise in the history of football, but also the most depressing. Well, I mean, this one was pretty depressing too, but Bayern didn't have any say in it, so it was a little bit different. I have also made an entire video about that logo and why it was forced upon them, titled Why Hitler Hated Bayern Munich, just in case you're not yet sick of my voice after watching this one. That is it for today's video then, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potts Armour, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and all of that other nonsense via the links available in the video description below, along with a whole lot of other good stuff down there. So, you know, only if you want to. It's up to you, really. Yeah, just throwing it out there. Have a brilliant day. Cheers.